So Keir Starmer, I mean, I suppose that you could just say that he's had a really bad 2025, but it didn't start well either. Like from the moment they got into power, things were going wrong and there were scandals. There was Sue Gray, there was Freebiegate, there was winter fuel, which kind of bled over into this year. I didn't realise that they didn't U-turn on winter fuel until June. Did you realise that they let it run for that long?
Wow. No.
Which obviously chipped away at their support. I mean, there is that other thing that I've been wondering about, wealthy pensioner benefits. In the budget, even the changes in tax on savings, pensioners were protected from those. Is there a single thing that you could ever take away from pensioners? They're just not, given their strength in numbers. Could you just one tiny little change?
The big thing about pensioners is they vote, isn't it? They get out and vote. My parents are 95 and 88 now, and I think the last general election was the first one they didn't get out of the house to vote for. They're absolutely committed to, once every 5 years. They don't go on marches. They don't camp outside their student union in a tent in order to change the policy on Palestine, but they will get out and defend their access to state funds, yeah. And it is interesting, whenever we talk about benefits being on welfare budget being the thing that's crippling the country and that's forcing the tax up. Even now I talk about it, even though I say it, that's not the thing you think of. But obviously pensions are the huge bulk of that, and we all think of, social housing in central London and people who are claiming disability or a car on the Motability or whatever. But pensions is the massive thing, yeah. I personally think means testing it, if you could do it efficiently without the administration of it costing more than you would save, would be a completely moral and justified approach to the whole thing, and probably even to some extent including a wealth tax in it, or taxing people on whatever income they get off investments and applying that to the state pension as well. There is still, although we all know it's not true, there is still this kind of mental model that I paid my money in and therefore I deserve to get my money out, as if you've been putting it into a literal physical piggy bank where it's been sitting there waiting for you to retire.
We paid the full stamp.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the one that they often say we paid for. Look, I'm literally playing with fire here because a decent portion of my listeners and tour goers will fall into this category. So it's all said.
I will in 5 years' time.
It's all said with love and respect. I suppose the problem for people of my generation, when people say I paid in, I mean, the general response is, yes, so do I. And I'll pay in more and I'll do it for longer and I'll get less. That is the anxiety.
Yeah.
And big ministerial sackings. I mean, probably the funniest one was Rusharana Ali, the homelessness minister, who was effectively made her tenants homeless.
Yeah.
That was so on the nose that, like we often, when we're doing political comedy, you say you couldn't make it up. If I'd have come up with that, I'd have gone, no, that's just, people won't like that. But that's naff. People will groan at that. And then you had, Tulip Siddiq, the corruption minister who was found guilty. It must be said in absentia in Bangladesh, but there's some smoke there at the very least. And the big high profile ones were Angela Rayner, your neighbour. Angela Rayner down there on the South Coast. I mean, one of the things when the photos emerged, obviously the story was about the tax avoidance, right, on moving house. But was the issue for the public this general level of surprise at how nice her gaff was? I mean, I'm not saying we wanted her to get sacked for that reason, but it was slightly off-brand, wasn't it, for Angela Rayner to have a big fuck-off gaff? And on the South Coast as well. It's like the two opposites of what you thought. Like, at best, she should have had a penthouse in Wigan.
I think so. I think, funny enough, and I've been sort of aware of this for some time, people have an idea that Hove really is some sort of Kensington by the sea. It isn't that nice. I mean, I think her flat was pretty decent, but it wasn't palatial. It wasn't amazing. I kind of think, to be honest, if somebody is Deputy Prime Minister and is doing a good job, I personally think they deserve a couple of decent, second homes to get away and let the pressure ease off. But of course, Labour had been nagging on that nerve so long in opposition that there was Schadenfreude when they get caught by it within a year of achieving power. That they present the Tories always as these people who are just sort of vampires just suckling off the privileges that the position buys them.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's like with Freebiegate, wasn't it? It was better to have got £1 million than a pair of glasses that you wear. I mean, the public are like, if you think about Ed Miliband, bacon sandwich, Rishi Sunak standing in the rain, like optics land. I mean, you raise a good question there. It's like, what do we think that we talk about the quality of politicians. I do think materially they are worse now. But I also think that's because the job's worse, because they've lost these sneaky little, benefits and expenses. There's way more scrutiny. It's a sclerotic electorate. I think the public should be accountable in a way that they need to face reality that it needs to be a well-paid job. But
the Telegraph had that big scoop about the expenses scandal. It went on for about a month. I think it was 2009, wasn't it? I seem to remember where I was living at the time. And I remember thinking this is a good opportunity to switch to a model where MPs get paid a really healthy salary. They have no benefits. They have no expenses, significant ones. They're not allowed to have other jobs or whatever. And they focus on the job in hand. And none of those opportunities were taken. It was just a loss of trust, a loss of credibility, a loss of affection even. There was a time, I remember when, if this is how it seemed to me, I was young, but when Mike Yarwood was doing his impressions of various MPs, there was a feeling that it was quite affectionate, that these people were sort of bumbling idiots, but they were our bumbling idiots. And quite a few MPs had served with distinction in the war still, people like Dennis Healey, whatever you thought of his politics, had come under fire and had come through. It was just a very, very different, now there's just a feeling that most of them are the kind of, they've taken the job as in the worst sort of possible, almost via the job centre, and it's just a real, third-rate kind of rapple.
It is one of the things about getting old. It's just, you realise how young policemen are, and you also realise that MPs aren't, and I don't say this with any hate, they're just not the brightest of us, because if they were, they wouldn't be doing it. I mean, I know it's that old thing about the desire for power is the biggest disqualification for having it, but there is truth in that, and arguably there's even more truth, as it is just a really hard job. When they talk about doing the media rounds now, once upon a time, it was a couple of appearances on the radio, maybe one on the telly. Now it's a whole morning of stuff across a vast, where the odds of you saying something fucking stupid just go up with every new podcast and TV station. That was one of the things I said about Labour coming into power, is that they just were tiptoeing towards number 10 without having acknowledged that some of the problems the Tories had were because it's actually really difficult to be the government. But, Starmer, with Rayner, He backed her and he sacked her. Similar principle with Peter Mandelson. I mean, Peter Mandelson was what I thought was interesting about that story was that he stayed friends with the revelations were, oh my God, I can't believe he stayed friends with him after that. But it was in the public domain that he'd stayed friends with him after the conviction for being a paedophile.
Yeah.
That was what was interesting to me. So it's kind of that was already quite bad. So I think Starmer maybe escaped, it wasn't a good moment for him, but he sort of escaped without that scrutiny. But then I guess a lot of TV stations and podcasts would have to go, well, we carried on working with him too. So let's focus on the second thing rather than the first.
Always reminded of this metaphor that came from Douglas Adams' book about endangered species. And he would talk about the rhino, which has a much more powerful sense of smell than it does vision. And so with us, you might smell burning for a couple of hours, in the house, you can smell burning, and then suddenly you see flames and you go into full panic mode and you do something. With rhinos, they might see a forest fire coming towards them, but they might not think anything of it until the wind changes and they get a sniff of the smoke, and then they suddenly react. I think the British public are like that with a lot of news stories. There are certain ways, there's a certain kind of what seems to people who observe politics closely all the time kind of go, can you not see that that there's this scandal, and then the wind changes and they get a sniff of the nature of the scandal, and the British public go into a sort of stampede mode when in fact the information had been there for months, sometimes years, but they hadn't acted. It's just the way it's presented. I mean, the obvious one is Rachel Reeves with the whether or not she lied to Parliament, whether or not she deceived everyone, the entire country, with the necessity of ramping up taxes to fill the black hole that the OBR had quite clearly told her didn't actually exist. That, for me, was the single biggest scandal of the government so far, and I think she should have gone. But the problem was it was too complicated, it was too dry, there were too many twists and turns. Dan Hodges, to his credit, not always my favourite journalist, but he gave a very simple explainer walking it through in the Daily Mail, maybe Mail on Sunday, and I thought that would possibly to tilt it. But the problem with Reeves, of course, is that Starmer, I mean, he wouldn't survive that a Reevesectomy. That would be he would die himself on the table if he had that organ removed. So they would go as a block, and he is. I mean, I have some sympathy with him from that point of view. He's had an extremely rough 18 months. I don't have sympathy with him for creating the damage and the harm unnecessarily that he's done and the tack they've taken. But you can see why he doesn't want to just like throw himself on the funeral pyre quite
yet. It's the beginning of the end, yeah. So, sort of zeroing in on more on Starmer now, they just polled, Find Out Now have polled them. I mean, there's some polls that say they've had a slight bump since the budget, but Find Out Now polled them at 14%, which is the lowest ever for a sitting government. His approval ratings have gone. In September, they were in very low positive territory among the Labour membership. He's now minus 30 with the Labour membership, which is fucking quite astonishing. I mean, these are dire figures, and we kind of had that one of the scandals of this year. One of the things that was really badly managed by Number 10 was the Wes Streeting briefing, where just out of nowhere in the evening, quite clearly from his team. I mean, this is where they just lie straight to the public, and I think that they think because they're the Labour Party that somehow their shit doesn't stink somehow. But just say, well, he's going to stay and fight, and there are people out there trying to get his job. Just so you know, he ain't going fucking nowhere, basically. And then Wes Streeting was out the following morning and put in a fairly sort of bravura performance, cracking gags, seeming like everything that Starmer's kind of not. And then, when the heat came back on them, Starmer stood up and said, I have asked Morgan McSweeney and I've asked my team and it didn't come from Number 10. And the problem they've got now is there's two situations where journalists are going, you're lying. Like, you're lying about the way you briefed about the budget. You lied about that. And I do think that bit by bit, they've turned, and, the lobby weren't necessarily for them, but they've kind of turned the lobby against them. And you see it now when their ministers go on Good Morning Britain or, people like Beth Rigby, there's a hostility in the way that they're covered, which they've absolutely created themselves.
That's interesting, yeah. Most people still regard Streeting as the sort of default challenger now, don't they? The pretender.
Not among the public. The public, his recognition is still lower than.
But who would be the public's expectation to step in there? Miliband.
And Angela Rayner has the highest recognition. But here's the thing: among the membership,
that reminds me of Frank Skinner's line about most famous GP.
Well, do you know who the membership are currently loving his work more than anyone else in the cabinet? Ed Miliband.
Yeah, mad God.
I wonder if, just to sort of wrap this section up on the government, is the biggest crime of Labour this year, in a way, you talk about honesty and what happened with the budget, is this massive change of direction without any kind of mandate to do it. So we're kind of like we're the sensible ones, Starmer and Reeves. We're going to manage the economy sensibly. We're not going to raise taxes. We're going to cut the welfare bill. And within the space of a year, that has all changed. And there've been other things, of course, for even winter fuel, there was no mandate for that. They just had an election, and they did that unilaterally, removing the child cap. Election wasn't that long ago. They've done that. Chagos, juryless trials, the farm tax, digital ID. I think there's a kind of dishonesty. There's one where you lie to someone's face about what you're going to do with no intention of doing it. And there's the other lie where you don't, where you sort of move into someone's flat and they go, oh, you're looking for, this is temporary, right? You're looking for somewhere else. And you go, oh, absolutely. And meanwhile, that person starts getting posts addressed to that person to their house. It's sneakier dishonesty in a way.
Yeah, it's true. They have had a few curveballs they might not have been able to expect. The response of Trump to NATO and the idea that Britain, like the rest of Europe, is going to have to beef up its defence bill and so on. Some of those things you have to do on the hoof. But I do think the digital ID thing in particular and the general drift, the continuation of the drift towards the sort of Stasi type mentality in the state is very worrying and completely unprovoked, and is not part of what their initial manifesto vibe was. The only thing I suppose you could say is that Starmer's people, the old saying about campaigning in poetry, governing in prose. I don't think Starmer ever demonstrated much poetry, did he? It was like the odd limerick.
It just campaigned in prose, dream in prose, just shit in prose. I'm trying to avoid just giving him a 0 out of 10 this year because that would be so obvious and feel biased. I suppose the only thing maybe is Starmer's relationship with Trump, which might have stopped Trump going off the complete deep end in terms of trying to be BFFs with Putin. So maybe we could give him a mark for that. The tariffs as well, that's a difficult thing. Out of 10, we'll focus this on the leader's performance. Out of 10, I'm going to struggle to give Keir Starmer more than 2 because I just don't know what he does well. He doesn't communicate well. He doesn't have a sense of mission. He U-turns. He seems quite slippery. The 2 is about as generous as I could be. How are you feeling numbers wise?
Absolutely. To go below 2 always feels like you're literally sort of scratching at the floor, like some kind of dog that's convinced there's a bone buried under the lino. So I think 2 expresses as much disappointment as is humanly possible without him actually having killed anyone, with his bare hands live on TV. But I'm a member of a book group, and that's as low as the most disappointing book ever goes. So
yeah, it's the lowest it could be. While we take some semblance of being objective commenters.
Yeah.